Hello, and welcome to a long overdue devlog for Lucen. The past couple of months have been crazy in so many ways, so I apologise for the delay on this devlog. Lucen now has a Steam page, so go wishlist it if you're keen, the link is in the description. Wishlisting helps its visibility a lot, so each one matters. I hope everyone's safe and well. These are really interesting times we're living in. Like many others, the coronavirus has impacted on my plans. Unfortunately, GDC was cancelled, which meant I didn't get to go to the US and deliver my Houdini presentation in person, but I did deliver it online. Side Effects uploaded it to their channel. I'll leave a link in the description. In it, I gave an overview of how I'm using Houdini for asset creation from modeling, animation and texturing to VFX and Houdini engine. Working on the talk was a lot of fun. It was good to step back and take a top-down look at my processes and put them on paper, so to speak, and the feedback on the talk has been really good so far. Now, one of the things I spent quite a bit of time on before I had to postpone it was the Kickstarter. I was originally going to launch at the end of March, but thought I would postpone it to be safe. Looking at other Kickstarters doing great recently, it seems like it hasn't affected much. Shoutouts to Swords and Magic, that did fantastic. While it's a shame that I postponed the Kickstarter, I've been pursuing other sources of funding too. I've spoken to a few publishers, and I'm looking into applying for some grants as well. I'm also not ruling out running the Kickstarter at a later date, but I'm not sure exactly when that will be. I worked really hard on the trailer for the Kickstarter, and as you may have seen, I released it anyway, because I didn't want to keep it hidden for any longer. It was a ton of fun to work on, and I'm so glad people liked it. I learned a lot putting it together and was blown away at the reception it got. Going viral on Reddit brought in a lot of wish lists as well as followers, etc. The more popular the post got there, unfortunately the more negative comments rolled in, but overall it was a positive experience. It also ended up getting a bunch of press coverage, which I wasn't expecting either. I didn't do a press release, so they must have picked it up from Reddit when I was on the front page. That drove a lot of traffic to YouTube and my other social media channels, as well as the Steam page too. The shot that ended up defining the cinematic approach of the rest of the trailer was the final shot. The pan-up reveal of the old god in the distance meant I decided to approach the rest of the shots with a build-up and suspense leading to that final reveal. I used the sequencer extensively for the trailer, for setting up cinematic shots both with and without Lucen in them. It was really fun to practice my cinematography, and I can see how Unreal is such a powerful tool for filmmakers now. For the shots where Lucen is walking, I used the sequencer to record the gameplay of me walking, and then played it back using a cinematic camera move. It allowed me to get much cleaner shots and frame them exactly how I wanted. For the combat though, it's recorded from the gameplay camera. It was really intuitive to set up the sequencer shots. You can keyframe all the values and it makes sense if you used any software with keyframes in it before. The music was made by the talented Lucas Peel, and he really nailed the sound that I'm after for Lucen. I'm really excited to keep working with him and see what he comes up with next. The sound design is by Sammy Schellenberg, a sound designer who recently came on board. She specialises in creature sounds, so I'm keen to hear what she comes up with for some of the creatures I have planned. I also made some new environments and enemies for the trailer. I made a swamp environment inhabited by these tumor-like creatures, and I had a lot of fun making them. I made the base in Houdini, sculpted in ZBrush and textured them in Substance Painter. I also made boars. I sculpted them in ZBrush, and I used the same technique as the chicken feathers to create their coats. Because of the Kickstarter being postponed, I'm diving headfirst into working on an upcoming demo for Lucen. I'm hoping to have it finished by around June or July, and I'm super excited and nervous to see what people think. After postponing the Kickstarter, I got onto overhauling quite a bit. I changed quite a lot graphically, including switching from deferred rendering to forward rendering, and redoing the grass, including implementing interactivity. Chris Murphy from Epic Games suggested that I try switching from deferred rendering to forward, as it can vastly increase performance. It has some limitations to render features compared to deferred. For instance, geometry can only be influenced by 4 shadow casting movable lights at a time, and you can't use screen space effects like SSAO or access the G-buffer. However, because of the stylized nature of my project, these limitations don't really affect it, and the graphical fidelity did not change by switching. Switching to forward rendering, I gained almost double the graphical performance, basically doubling frame rates. It has allowed me to take some more liberties with the graphics and ultimately improve them beyond where they were before. Part of the improvements has been a complete overhaul of the grass. While I liked the grass before, a lot of its look actually came from the blurriness of temporal AA. I switched to a different alpha texture that gives me a crisper read. I'm using one of the grass alpha textures from Kenny NL. He makes some awesome free assets and I recommend checking out his stuff. As well as changing the alpha texture, I also made various changes to the grass material to bring it more in line with what I wanted. It's semi-toon shaded, but I've made sure to keep the shadows soft as I really like when the grass looks soft and fluffy. I'm still not casting dynamic shadows from the grass, however it's sort of faked in the shader. I'm using a technique from the kite demo grass to tweak the normals based on the wind, and that creates the spots of light and gives it the illusion that the lower parts of the grass are self-shadowing. I added a bias parameter for this to control how much it affects the grass. The parameters which are most in control of how soft the grass looks are the roughness and offset. Offset is a parameter of the toon shading model in the custom build of Unreal that I'm using, and it refers to how the light wraps around the object. For example, the offset of the start of the portion of the object that is considered in light compared to in shadow. So a physically correct value would be 0.5. But I found a value of 0.42 combined with 0.6 in the roughness is the sweet spot for making the shading behave this way. The character interaction with the grass is driving the rotation using a particle system projected onto a render target. There are some good resources for this out there. I'll link a tutorial in the description. I'll be doing a more in-depth breakdown on the grass in the future. I also polished up a lot of gameplay after the trailer. I tightened up the sword combos as well as more properly implementing bow aiming. Because I think Lucen will be best played with the controller, although mouse and keyboard is also supported of course, I've implemented an aim assist that I think feels pretty natural. The main function of this is to help you aim snap to targets that you're trying to aim at, but may have overshot or undershot slightly because a controller analog stick is hard to be accurate with. It's a similar technique to auto aim implemented in shooters on console. The way it works is that while aiming the bow, there's a capsule trace sent from the center of the screen with a small width value. This width value determines the distance from your target before it will assist aim, so it's quite small. When this overlaps an enemy, it will interpolate the aim rotation to lock onto the enemy. It's not that quick to lock on, and doesn't stop you from changing the aim either, so it's feeling pretty nice at the moment. I will of course continue to tweak this and make it optional in the controls menu. I added a dissolve effect to enemies when they die too, so that they can fade out nicely. Inheritance is something that is super important, adding these kind of things across multiple enemies. I add this functionality in the enemy base class, and then every enemy gets that logic. The same thing goes for the damage interface, attack functions and taking damage, health bar logic, etc. Because this stuff is all defined in the base class that each enemy inherits from, it's easy to make changes that affect all of them and not have to do extra work. Some other criticisms I received about the trailer were that Lucen's character was too simple relative to the environments, and that the animations were just shit. I completely agree with both of these things. Lucen's model was always sort of placeholder, and the animations were pretty rushed and needed changing. So I decided it was high time to give Lucen an upgrade. Introducing Lucen 2.0, Face Edition. It's still a work in progress, and I'm continuing to refine all the elements as I go. Now because my anatomy is not top tier, I decided to start sculpting from a base mesh in ZBrush. I used this base mesh as a starting point, which is great because as a bonus it has good topology out of the box as well. So after sculpting the body in ZBrush, I took it into Marvelous Designer to make the clothing. Marvelous is a really powerful tool and very intuitive to use. You draw your clothing in the 2D view, add seams and lay it out in the 3D view, and then simulate while tweaking. It's nice and quick to iterate. Once I was happy with the clothing, I brought it back into ZBrush to add the accessories and shoes. After completing the high poly, I brought it into Houdini for retopology. Exoside Quad Remesher is an awesome plugin for Houdini that gives insanely clean retopology results, so I leveraged this a lot. I also optimized the mesh so that parts of Lucen's body that are inside the clothing are culled, as well as adding some soft transforms to tweak his overall proportions. Because I had used subdivision for sculpting Lucen's face and body, I got a pretty good low poly version for free that maintained the original topology, so I didn't need to retopologize that. I decided that I would spend a bit more effort UVing Lucen this time since he is more detailed. I used Rism UV because I heard good things, and wow, this software is super powerful. I hadn't done much manual UV unwrapping in quite a while, and I'm amazed by how far the tech has come. I basically just had to mark the seams and the software handled the rest. I laid out 4 sets of UVs for Lucen, set up like this: eyes, skin, top and bottom. In Unreal, the skin, top and bottom all use a material instance with textures swapped out, and the eyes are their own material. For the texturing process for Lucen, I used Substance Painter. The first thing I did was to bake all the mesh maps to be used with smart materials. I then used layers and masks to isolate areas and use smart materials for texturing. I painted bespoke aspects such as his freckles, lips and some parts of his face, as well as using a 3D linear gradient to map some slight colour variation to his face and body. There's quite a bit of detail baked into Lucen by taking advantage of the ambient occlusion and curvature maps, as well as a little bit of baked lighting. This helps contribute to the stylized art style of the game, and gives a lot of detail even though it's toon shaded. This way, when he's in shadow, his features are still readable, and the lighting can maintain the toon properties without compromising. Overall, I'm really happy with this new look. Once I finished, I got started on the rig. I'm excited to mention I will be working with an animator, at least temporarily for the demo. He's a good friend and also works in the VFX industry. So for the rig, I'm making it as industry standard as possible, giving the IK controls space switching, finger controls, toe roll, etc. to make his job as easy as possible. I'm really enjoying making a rig with a pro animator in mind, as it's taken things to the next level. A big plus is that I can also reuse this rig in the future for any other bipedal characters, so any time I spend here is going to pay off in the future too. I'm using auto geometry capture for the time being for temporary skinning as I continue to refine the rig. There are a couple of gotchas in Houdini rigging that have taken me some time to figure out, so I'll mention them here for anyone who might use Houdini for animation in the future. Scale. Houdini geometry must be scaled up by 100 to have parity with Unreal. Unfortunately for rigging, there's no way to scale your skeleton after rigging that will keep all of the bones and nulls at the correct size. There is at least one bone that's always scaled by 100, which is not good. This ends up affecting things inside Unreal like physics, or the scale when parenting geometry to bones, and it's a headache to deal with. The solution for this is to create your skeleton, rig, and animate at 100 times scale in Houdini. Functionally, this makes no difference, but it's important to know before getting started. The other gotcha is that any nulls used as controls will be exported in the skeleton hierarchy. The shapes won't be by default, but the nulls are added to the skeleton and add unneeded clutter inside Unreal. The best way to deal with this is to make a referenced version of your skeleton that only contains the skeleton hierarchy. This is the rig that will be exported to Unreal. I've done this by constraining each bone in the bind rig to its corresponding bone in the control rig. It's been working great so far and gives me a lot of freedom for creating custom controls without worrying how it will affect the skeleton. I've also included a null for the sword to attach to inside Unreal that can be animated. So instead of constraining the sword to the hand bone in Unreal and being stuck with the stiffness of it being glued to the hand, the animator can add subtle shifts and movement to the sword inside the animation that will come through when I parent it to the null on the skeletal mesh. Regarding the sword and bow, I'm also planning to redesign them going forward. I feel as though right now the sword is too fat and chunky, and does not fit as well as I'd like for the kind of combos I want Lucen to have. I've made a basic shape for the animator to use as reference for the time being, and will begin sculpting the new one soon. Similarly, I will be sculpting the bow and arrow models to bring them more in line aesthetically, as previously they were quickly made placeholders. Something I'm considering for the future is gear upgrades that can be found in the world, though I'm still unsure. I will be seeing how making the demo goes to determine whether there's scope for that or not. I'm not averse to growing the team in the future though, so it may be possible that a year from now, there will be a few more people working on Lucen. I've been testing implementing the Advanced Locomotion System version 3, which is free on the Unreal Marketplace, into Lucen. My tests so far have been very positive. The system is really powerful and works pretty well out of the box retargeting it to Lucen's skeleton. I did also test V4, however it has quite a few more gotchas and I had more issues with it, so for the time being I'll probably stick to version 3. The great part is that while all the animations and procedural poses work great out of the box, and I can keep using them for now, eventually I'll be able to swap in custom animations for the walking, running, jumping and poses, etc. I love how much more fluid the movement feels with this system, and I'm really glad I decided to use it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and hit the bell if you'd like to see more, and wishlist on Steam if you're keen. And feel free to follow on Twitter, join the Discord, or support on Patreon. The links are in the description.